Welcome to the Myofascial Health Podcast, hosted by me, Unu. Follow along as I explore the depths of John Barnes' myofascial release approach on my road to mastery. Along the way, I'll be sharing the lessons I learn as I open my myofascial release practice in Austin, Texas, so that you don't have to make the same mistakes I do. Welcome back to the Myofascial Health Podcast. Now, I'm joined here by a very special guest. He's a rock climber, he's a backpacking guide, he's also identifies as a dirtbag. It's my honor to introduce Zeke McDonald. Thank you so much for joining me on this podcast.
Thanks for having me, man. I'm stoked.
Yeah, so I first met you a trip to Sedona, and Sedona is a place that is near and dear to my heart. And it was, I believe, in 2022. To my knowledge, I didn't think that there was any sport climbing or, the climbing with ropes and there's bolts in the rocks in Sedona. I thought it was all trad climbing, where you had to place gear and you didn't want to do anything to disrupt the natural beauty of the rock. And then I saw you climbing at what's called Stupa Boulder, which we just got to climb more recently. By the grace of God, I just had asked, hey, would you be willing to take me climbing? And you said, if you can get gear, you just need the harness and a helmet and shoes and chalk bag, but I got a rope and the draws. And from there kind of blossomed this friendship.
Yeah.
So I just want to thank you again because, again, I think there's such a great value in meeting someone who kind of knows the lay of the land. I don't know for my listeners who haven't been rock climbing, but there's an approach, which means like sometimes it's a short hike, sometimes it's a longer hike. But if you go with someone who knows exactly where it is, you don't have to go bushwhacking and get lost and find your way. So I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for being open to taking someone who you just met to go rock climbing. I really, truly am grateful and appreciate your presence in that. And another thing I want to mention is, Zeke identifies as a dirtbag, and that isn't necessarily a derogatory term. I know it sounds a little harsh, but in the realm of rock climbing, a dirtbag is someone who lives out of their car, drives around just to rock climb. And I think it's such an awesome lifestyle if it's for you, So on that note, can you tell us a little bit more about what it means to you to be a dirtbagger?
Oh, yeah, man. Yeah, so it's like I got a lot of inspiration to come out west and just see what it's all about by reading and just watching old climbing documentaries and stuff like that. And this term would always come up, like dirtbag, this guy's a local dirtbag. He's just, just kind of the theme I got from that was just freedom to do exactly what you want. And, the term dirtbag is, multifaceted. You can be a rock climber, you can be a backpacker, you can just kind of roam around. I think you kind of define the definition for yourself. But I would say the root of it is just freedom and having the ability to do exactly what you want.
I love that. And I think that is a level of freedom that you can find if you choose to look for it. I think many times in our lives, we get told what we're supposed to do or who to become, and we live out those dreams that aren't our dreams. So if there's any advice that I could give to anyone who might be listening, it's, you can have a dream, but make sure it's your dream. And as long as you're pursuing something that you want to do for yourself, you won't have that regret, And I think for you, you've chosen that path very consciously. In the discussions that I've gotten to have with you and getting to know you, you were once a baseball player, and then you went into kind of this college arena. Can you talk us through that and how you ended up choosing your path?
Yeah, man. Yeah, I played baseball for when I was 6 years old, literally up until I was 18. That was kind of my way of life. Coming around like high school time, I figured there was more out there, so I started reading, books like Into the Wild, Call of the Wild. All these books just gave me a ton of inspiration to just like go see what is. Right out of high school, I had an offer to go play baseball at this 2-year school in remote Alabama. And I was like, I don't think I really want to do that. And so I ended up hitting up my cousin to see if he had any jobs at his pawn shop that he owned. And he did. So I worked there for 6 months right out of high school and was just kind of getting out of the house, moved into my own place. And then I just like kind of searching for more, always searching for more. It's kind of the theme until I found the Conservation Corps. So that kind of opened up my world to meeting, dirtbags who had like traveled around the country and kind of had seen what is, and then kind of seeing them live that life. It kind of inspired me to just continue that search for how am I going to get out west. Long story short, that season got cut pretty quick, but the inspiration stuck with me, and so yeah, eventually made my way out west to Flagstaff. That's where I'm at these days.
I love that. Now, you were on this path, going to school, you had a scholarship for baseball. Was there ever any pushback from your parents to like keep going the path and you saying, "Hey, that's not for me"? Was there any kind of friction there?
Yes and no. I think like by the time my sophomore year of high school came around, my parents kind of accepted that I was gonna kind of do what I sought out to do. And I mean, when I left to go to Flagstaff, I left on like a week's notice. I was like, "Hey guys, I'm gonna go across the country," and they were like, "Okay, but you'll be back, right?" And I was like, "I don't know," but and so I went out, came out here on an 8 month season, and I think they thought I was eventually going to come back, and maybe I did too, ever so slightly. But I did that season, and then had some adventures planned after that, and then I'm kind of committed to the bit now. So I think they're more they were never fully like against me doing this, but they just kind of thought it was like, well, I don't really know why you would want to go live that way, but we'll support you from here. At this point, I do feel supported by them, especially my mom. She is so cool, man. I could be doing anything, and she'd think that's the coolest thing ever. My dad, he just doesn't really understand it, I think. Even though he has come out here and like seen the way I live, I think he thinks it's cool, but he just doesn't really understand it.
And he doesn't have to, it's kind of
Yeah,
more personal to you. But it sounds like there's a supportive environment, and I think that goes without saying that when you feel that support, you're able to kind of breathe. You're not kind of like having to fear the I don't know the judgment or living up to certain expectations. It's just kind of you get to be yourself, and I think that is one of the true freedoms in life. Now, you said you found out that it's for you, and I love that you found that for yourself. And I'll just say, when I look at your story and I see you and I get to meet up with you or climb with you, I'm like, you're doing it. And what I mean by that is, you're in your 20s. And so you're young, your body doesn't need a whole lot of, stuff to keep it going. And so you
totally.
can live out of a car or you can do these things that you might be scared to do, but taking those risks allows you to grow as a person and as a human being.
Totally, man.
So like I love that you took that risk. Did you have any fears about that?
Honestly, man, I was so stoked when I was 19 when I first moved out here. I was so stoked and excited. I I really didn't feel a lot of fear initially in like the initial move, and I think that season in Tennessee really helped me out. Just kind of like get the hang of doing the car thing and like meeting people who had done it, for a long time before I met them. But I might be having some like recency bias or something. But I remember just being just infinitely stoked to get out here. I will say I have moved since, moving to Flagstaff. I like last year I moved up to Washington for a bit, and that was really scary. I think I felt fear and nervousness in that move, and I was thinking back and just like reflecting when I was 19, moved out here. I was like, man, was I just like naive about the world, or just didn't know what was, so I didn't really know what to be afraid about. And so I guess my fear rooted in the second move was like, who am I gonna meet? What am I gonna do, But I think in the first move, I was just really stoked.
I love that. I think when you have a sense of joy and when
Mhm.
you kind of reflect on that, that is an innate feeling inside of all of us that I think that as we get older, we stop listening to. But if you have that moment, just go with it. What's the
Totally.
worst that could happen? And I think a lot of times the fearful voice will say, hey, it's not going to work out or this, that, and the other. But there's this softer voice that says, but what if it does? And what if it's better than
Mm.
you could have possibly imagined? And I'll just say for myself, to hear you take that risk at 19, I think that that is super commendable. I know that at 19, I would not have had the courage to do that. Now, you said you met people to learn the car thing,
Yeah, yeah.
Can you elaborate on what that is?
Oh man, so they just had when I was going up to Chattanooga, I was in a four-door Mitsubishi Lancer, and I also had a cat at the time. And I was just like, all right, I'm just gonna go up there and try to figure it out. And when I arrived, the people I was working with, and I would also hang out with them, outside of work, they just had these elaborate, setups. For example, my friend Jocelyn, she had this old, it was like a GMC van or something like that, like almost looked like a Chevy Astro. And she just had it built out to a T. Like she had a bed in there, and it was very organized and dialed. And I was like, man, one of these days I'm gonna get a van and do something like that. But just like the main thing I could see from them is they just had life on the road dialed, and made it as comfortable and as easy as they could. And I came to learn that it is really not, it's not that easy to be on the road, but the good outweighs the bad. So yeah.
What are the not easy things?
Oh man, let's see. I have had my hardest times. So nowadays I have a van, so it's a little more comfortable, and I can actually like sit up in it rather than the Lancer. But my most, I think of like my hardships when I'm on the road and just like living out of a van or whatever. It's mostly the winter. It's the cold for me. Cooking is also kind of difficult during that time. But some people struggle with finding spots with phone service if they have to work. Luckily, I don't really have to worry about that too much. But for me, it's mostly the weather and just like being able to cook and like take care of myself when the weather's not ideal.
Yeah, I would imagine that the weather plays a huge factor if you're living out of your car. I think something that you had shared the last time we climbed was, in your car, when the sun sets, like the day is
Yeah,
over, like
totally,
You
man.
know, and I think you have a perspective that you appreciate. So, like right now, you're like, "How's the lighting?" And you're just next to your lamp. And I know you had said like, right now you have this space or you have this lamp where you can read at night if you want to. But in the car, it's like once the lights out or once the sun sets, it's kind of game over. Like you can diddle daddle on your phone or something, but like pretty much. It's time to turn in. Is that fair to say?
Oh, absolutely, man. And that even goes to what I was saying earlier. Like when it's cold out, it typically means the sun is setting at, like 5:30 or even earlier. Yeah, now I'm in a house. It's raining outside. I'm dry. I can't complain. But the other side of that coin, with it getting dark so early, and you're in the van, you kind of get synced up with the sun, like on your sleep schedule. So that's kind of fun. You feel really connected to the sun and the moon. So that's like the good side of it. I would say.
I love that. I love that you can see there's always a silver lining or there's a good side in addition to the bad side. It's not always just the bad side, you know?
Totally, man.
And I'll just say that for myself, I had done a intensive therapy on the rocks, which is John's myofascial release therapy
Heck yeah.
clinic in Sedona. And this was in 2021, where COVID was still kind of there, airlines had shut down. And so the only way for me to get to Sedona from Austin was to drive.
Yeah.
And so I drove in an SUV, like mid-size, and I had an inflatable mattress that I would prop up in the trunk.
Yes.
And I'll say, like, the most beautiful sunsets you would think would be in nature and in the canyons, but they're in like the Walmart parking lot. Like, for some reason, sunsets and sunrises just hit differently. They're like
Yeah.
majestic, you know?
Yeah.
And but for me, sleeping in my car for the few nights I did, I'm like, yo, I'm waking up with like back pain. Like my back is tight. And so that's why I say like it's a young man's game, like your age, like if I was in my 20s, I would feel like I would be better prepared for that. But I was in my 30s and I was like, this just isn't for me. But
Totally.
I always loved that kind of not necessarily nomadic, but it's like we have so much excess, and what is it that you really need to have a life worth living? And when I encounter dirtbags, there's this like perspective of like, you don't need a lot. And as you kind of, live in the world and, maybe you get accustomed to a house per se, then
Mm.
oftentimes what ends up happening is you start filling that with stuff. And don't get me wrong, it feels more homey and welcoming, but it's like, is that what you need? So as you've transitioned from van life into more of a housing situation, what have you learned about yourself?
Totally, man. So something I love about, living out of the van or just living that like nomadic lifestyle is you really do live a life almost like stripped down. And I think that makes things less complicated and just simplifies things. It's a simpler way of life. You don't own as many things. So I think that directly correlates kind of with your mind. It's like, your mind might be a little less cluttered if you have less clutter. But yeah, the transition into the house has been amazing. I can like stretch out, and I definitely am acquiring more things because one of my intentions with moving into the house has just been to like cultivate a bigger space rather than in the van. I have brought all my things that I had like in the van, like into my room, and that feels really nice. But yeah, and I, for example, like yesterday, I bought some more hangers because I would love to, I don't know, accumulate more clothes, expand the collection. So but I'm gonna try to keep a balance with that because I inevitably will get the call to, go back on the road and be back in the van. So I gotta keep a check on myself because only so much will fit in the van. But I really think that just kind of that way of life limits you on the things you own, and I don't think that's a bad thing. Because like you said, we do kind of live in a society of excess with things you don't necessarily need. Yeah, I love minimalism. That's
Yeah.
I would definitely identify as a minimalist or try to be.
That's awesome. And I think that is something we can all learn from. I think I had read or seen some message from like a shaman and they asked the shaman like what's poison? And he said poison is anything excess. Anything that you don't
I
need
love it. Yeah.
is poison because then you kind of get used to those things. And
Hmm.
so that nomadic lifestyle where it's like, hey, you don't need a lot. You just need these little things and if you can get comfortable in that, then hopefully that when you upgrade, if you have that opportunity, you appreciate those things. But I know that there's a lot of people who have tons of things, way more in excess than they need. And, if they quote unquote live the van life, they would see it as a downgrade. And I don't think that that's
Mm.
necessarily the way to go about life. Now, we're doing a podcast and this is a video recording. Zeke is actually, how tall are you? You're like 6 foot 6 foot something?
I'll take the 1 inch. I'm 6'1".
Okay, 6 foot 1. So like just to give it more of an image, it's like I can't even imagine you living out of a Mitsubishi like what Lancer, like a little sedan. And so one of the things that you had really appreciated when you got to upgrade to a van was like I needed to be able to just stand up or sit up,
Yeah.
you know? And you'd be surprised that like that's such a minute thing that when you feel it though, you're like, dude, I appreciate this. Like this is heaven, you know? And so let me just ask you, like, when you upgraded from the sedan to a van, how did you make your decisions?
Oh, so the van I got was a Toyota Sienna, and I had a past partner who we sort of lived out of this Sienna together, and this was years ago, but I was also living out of the Lancer too. But experiencing how a Sienna was, I was like, man, this is pretty sweet, you know? And it's got the space I would need. Toyota's good and reliable, easy to work on. But it was honestly, I had seen it done before, and so I was like, I can definitely replicate that. And just like the maneuverability of it all, just game changer, man. I felt like I upgraded to a mansion. And yeah, I think living this way will set me up well for when I hopefully have a place of my own, which I do at the moment, but ideally would like to own it one of these days. But
Absolutely. So I guess, I've romanticized the idea of van life. And, I remember actually on a trip to Europe, my now wife and I had, instead of booking like hostels or hotels or Airbnbs, we just rented a van and drove it around Europe. And that idea to live out van life was awesome. Now, here's the thing. It was earlier on in our relationship. We had been on one out of state trip together. And then this was like a big kind of international trip. And I'll say that what I would recommend for any relationship is if you go on some sort of international trip with your partner, I think that that's a must because you will encounter difficult situations that you will have to figure out together. And I'll say that there are moments where I would have just given up. And this is where I have to remember these moments. So, for example, we're driving the van around, and so we had found that the best places to sleep were at like state parks. If there were trees that like blocked out the noise, that was ideal. Versus if you found like a street parking spot, then like every car or train that passes by, like it is right there. You will definitely hear it. There's no deep sleep. But if you can kind of get secluded a little bit, then there's less noise to kind of wake you up. And we were going to Slovenia, and I had found a park in Germany that we were able to sleep 2 good nights in, and she found this spot in Slovenia. And I was driving up, and it was one of those places where there was a lot of leaves, and okay, and we had to go up this kind of like, I'm just gonna say it was like a small mountainside to the point where if you're going, you have to use the momentum. There's no like, if you stop, game over, because like there's not enough friction because of the leaves on the ground. So we
yeah,
end up going up this mountain, and as we're driving by people are giving us weird looks like, how the hell are you getting this van all the way up this mountain? So we
yeah,
find this spot, and I'm like operating on no sleep because we had just come from a place, and so like we had to find a different spot. And so I drove the van, tried to drive it down, and we got stuck in a ditch. I drove into the small ditch, and I was like already stressed out, sleep deprived, and I remember like crying out. And
yeah,
there might have been some profanities in there, but I was like, I
yeah, yeah,
and in that moment, my now wife was like, "Look, we're just in a ditch. All we have to do is use these like these like triangle blocks that they put under these wheels, and you don't just reverse. You have to go forward a little bit, and then when your car goes backwards for the momentum, then you
yeah,
use that momentum and reverse out of it." And by the grace of God, that worked. We got out of this ditch and we drove back. But I was like at my wits' end. I'd given up and she was there, you know? And I
Hmm.
mentioned that because on this trip, where it was like living together on steroids. Because if you, for anyone who's moved in with their partner for the first time, there's gonna be some friction, right? Because you normally live a certain way, your partner probably lives a certain way, and you have to make that work. But to then add a layer of like, we're in a van, like there's no personal space, like
Yeah.
there's like if there's a conflict, like you guys are just gonna marinate in that.
Yep.
And so when I look back on this trip, it's like despite how bad certain moments were, that trip would have never been that great without her, you know?
Right.
And so when I think about our marriage now, it's like no matter how bad it gets, my life is better with her in it. And I have to remind myself that. But I'll just say that there were definitely moments where we were like, figuratively like pulling each other's hair and that kind of thing. And
Totally.
but through it all, it's like we learned that we could get out of moments together. When we have a unified goal that we can work towards, it's no longer about us. We just figure things out. And I think that you have to learn that or come across certain situations, high pressure situations, for you to figure that out. I don't think that that happens from like a happenstance. So all that being said is like we did the van life thing. And I remember it was one of those trips where after the trip we're like, all right, we don't need to see each other for a few days. Let's just like decompress. But I
Yep.
remember thinking like, dude, I just like a queen size bed. Like I just
Yep.
like some space. And a warm shower, being able to take a warm shower whenever you want, because we had a small shower in the van, but once your propane tank ran out of gas, like it's cold showers from then on out. There's nothing to warm that water. And so
Totally.
like you appreciate those things a lot more. And then of
Mm.
course you habituate to it and then it becomes normal. But I have to remember like, man, there are these moments where it's like when we didn't have that, we appreciated it more. Like where to use the bathroom. Like it's a van for the two of us. We didn't want to take a number two in the van, so you have to like find the places that you can go and had clean restrooms and toilet
Yeah.
paper. Like it's a whole thing that until you are in that moment, you don't even think about. Like you don't even consider that as being a challenge. And
Yeah.
then, but through those moments, I think that nomadic lifestyle, you're like, man, I appreciate when I actually get things as opposed to taking them for granted.
Absolutely, man. Yeah. Like I just think the lifestyle, it kind of like the hardships mirror just life in general, and I think they kind of prep you for a lot of different situations. I don't know, life's what's the saying? Life's or experience is the greatest teacher or something like that. You learn so much from moments like that, not only about yourself, about the other person you're with, about y'all's relationship. It's really beautiful. It's just everything kind of mirrors itself.
100%. Now, okay, so hypothetically, let's say I'm curious in this dirt bag lifestyle and I want to build out a van, like what are the must haves in your opinion?
Oh man. So that's going to depend on the person. I can attest for me, I wanted my bed to go kind of fully over the majority of the back of the van. Then I wanted a counter space where I could cook, and then I'm constantly making adjustments to it, like something that totally changed the game for me. Me and my brother-in-law first did the build, this was back in December 2023. I was super amped to just like get on the road. So we put this thing together in like 3 days, and I put majority of the things I owned kind of towards the back of the van instead of underneath my bed. But let's see, like 6 months passed, and I was like wanting to redo the van, and then I was in St. George, Utah, and my friend Diva has a lot of experience in woodworking and stuff like that. And I was like, Diva, like I want to raise my bed and put a hinge on it so I could put things underneath my bed. And so we did that, and it took like half a day. It was nothing, and that so far that was the game changer for me. Like that totally upgraded the van. But that's also the fun thing about doing a build on a van is like you can customize it to however you'd like, if you have the knowledge and the skills and the tools. Yeah, one thing I would love to upgrade on my van is I'd like to put a sink in there. I think now that I'm in a house and I have running water, I'm just like, all right, some form of running water would be pretty sweet. But you really can get away with the bare minimum. I mean, yeah, like I did the Lancer thing for many years without any build or anything, just had a sleeping bag and just kind of made it work. But I think something that is interesting is like I think our younger selves are more resilient than our older selves, or maybe just like tougher. I think a lot of that comes from not knowing what you don't know and kind of figuring that out, and then you kind of learn what you didn't know, and you create these bias, and so yeah, I think to circle back and answer your question fully, it's just like whatever you want in the van you could put in there. I think the mind is powerful if you think it, and you can bring it into reality.
I love that you can manifest it.
Oh, absolutely.
I guess to me, if I thought about doing that myself, I kind of feel overwhelmed. Like I don't even know where to start. And so like, are there basic tools that you could learn? Or is it, do you have to know somebody who can like, do you have to weld anything? Like I wouldn't even know how to do
Yeah.
that. Or is it like,
So
yeah, go
that's
ahead.
a yeah, man, that's a great question. So I fully believe in YouTube University. Man, just go on YouTube, search up whatever you want to know, and it's there, I definitely did a lot of that before doing my build, but also my brother-in-law really helped me out. He had the tools. He definitely had the majority of, like the cutting knowledge and measuring and all that. So I'm very grateful and fortunate to know him and for him to help me out. A lot of my friends here in town, there's this like community center or kind of co-op thing where you can get a membership, and you can go there, and they have a lot of woodworking tools and just kind of gives you a space to work on anything you'd like. I've got friends who build vans there, but yeah, I would say just like get a van or something you're stoked on, and kind of just come up with an idea. I think everyone has creativity within themselves, and just whatever comes to mind, just try to pull it out and make it materialize. And if you don't like it, try again. That's kind of a good omen for everything, I think.
I love how you say that because for you, what I'm hearing is you don't really put any pressure on yourself. Like just do the thing that you're scared to do. And if it's not gonna turn out the way you thought, then you can redo it. It's not like anything that's super permanent. Whereas I think a lot of times, at least for myself, I kind of get this like analysis paralysis. It's like, okay, well then which one do I pick? Do I pick the best thing or what? And then you're just like, just do it, right? Like
Hmm.
just do it. You'll learn from what you've done and then you can refine it. Nothing is like a permanent, this one decision is going to shape the future of your van life experience or your life in general. So
Yeah,
just
man.
do the thing.
Totally. Yeah, I can think of very few things that are like, okay, this is the way it is, or this is the way it needs to be. There doesn't have to be all this like rigidity surrounding things, just goes back to feeling that freedom, feeling that freedom to express and create and kind of do whatever you like.
Absolutely. One of the things that we here at Myofascial Release is soften your focus, you know?
Love it.
And all that means is instead of dialing in on this one path, if you soften that, you're aware of everything around you. And then
Mm.
you'll start to see that there's these other opportunities or options that you would have otherwise been blinded to. And this is directly correlated with rock climbing as well, because there's this element of fear, this fear of falling that I love about rock climbing. And so when you're climbing and you feel like you're about to fall, you're going to notice your field of vision gets very narrow because you're just looking for that next thing you can grab onto. And that is going to work against you a lot of times because you'll miss the bigger picture if you kept your gaze softened, if you softened your focus. And so that's, I think, a good way to go about life as well, is like if you stay dialed in on this one way that it has to be done, one, you might find yourself super frustrated, but two, you're gonna miss out on this avenue that's been right there the whole time. You've just kind of been blinded to it because you're hell bent on this one way that you think it has to be done.
That just makes me think of, so when I'm in the Pacific Northwest and I'm taking people out on these guided trips, I think, the environments we find ourselves in out there are really unique because, there's so many intricate things going on. I try to encourage people to, it's kind of like the thing I'll say is like zoom in and zoom out, like zoom in on the little pieces of moss and the little fungi around and the things, but there's also being in those spaces give you an opportunity to kind of zoom out of that kind of tunnel vision you're talking about, and that just carries over to so many other things. And then the other side of that is, when we're in the Grand Canyon, it's very, the desert does have a lot of intricate things going on as well, but that kind of the openness of that allows us to zoom out and really think about things and get things sorted in our minds. And so I love what you said about, the tunnel vision, how everything comes in. It's just take a breath and try to zoom out. There are times to zoom in and times to zoom out, I guess.
Yeah, 100%. It's like a micro and macro. They both exist, but sometimes you get so focused in on one thing that you miss everything else. Uh,
Totally.
Another way that John will speak about this or teach about this is it's the difference between the hawk and the eagle. The hawk has this vision where it just zooms in on one thing, but an eagle will look at a broad picture and it might notice something rustling in the bushes and then it goes in because it knows that there's like food or something there. And so he challenges us to have more of an eagle's perspective as opposed to the hawks. Not to say that you're not going to zoom in and have this focus sometimes, just kind of like what you're saying, but you need to have both. And I find that especially when we grow into adults, we get busy. So then our focus
Mm.
gets really narrow. But if you said, like, just take a breath, just soften up a little bit, then everything else becomes available to you.
I love that. I love that, man.
Yeah, so okay, and then I wanted to know, because you have a very interesting life experience of moving away from home at a young age, just saying, "Hey, I'm gonna go out west," not really knowing what was gonna be there. And then you found yourself in Flagstaff, living out of a car. Now you have a place to stay. How would you define home?
Oh man, the cliche answer I will give is home is where you lay your head. But to kind of open that phrase up a bit more, for me it's where I feel the most comfortable and content and just feel like the most inner peace. Those are some of the things I seek out in a kind of a home base. And I feel that here in Flagstaff. I always know I can come back here and feel grounded, and I have a beautiful community of friends. I basically feel like just all my needs are met here. It's why I call it the center of the universe for me. And, I think people could benefit from trying to find that center of the universe. And even if like one thing about a place isn't satisfying, I think it's worth it to check out other places if that's something you want to do. But Flagstaff feels like home, but I do feel the need to go out and explore and see what else there is. But what I tell people is like it feels like every time I leave Flagstaff, there's like a little piece of yarn, attached to my soul or whatever thing. I don't know. And it's like whenever I stop in a place where I'm going to be for a little while, like that piece of yarn there's like some tension. It's like pulling me back. It's like, hey man, like you got to come back at some point. And I really like that feeling of just being able to come back to a very comfortable place that makes me feel good.
I love that. I think that there's a feeling behind that that you described as opposed to a place. And I resonate with that because Sedona is a place that's near and dear to my heart. And whenever I go back there, I just feel like I get to unplug from, the stresses of life or work. And
Mm.
I get really centered and grounded. And then especially if I, get to climb with you or just just get out of my day-to-day habits that just naturally creep up on me. And
Totally.
then I feel more like myself. And I think that that is a feeling. I wouldn't call Sedona home, but it is that place that I get to feel like, man, I just feel like I'm more connected. And after this last trip from Sedona, actually, that I got to go with my wife, we
Mm.
made a conscious effort to say, okay, what are the things that we learned in Sedona that we want to integrate into our normal daily lives here in Austin? Because yeah, I'm gonna have to work, not have to work. I get to work. I get to do these things, but that takes up energy. And I remember I had written down a list of like, what are the things that give me energy? And it was like hiking or climbing, socializing with friends and acquaintances. And another thing was myofascial release. And I
Mm.
know that when I'm here in home in Austin, those things tend to get away from me because I'll convince myself that I have to do certain things, whether it's for the business or for these obligations. And then I kind of put those things on the back burner. But I need to really prioritize those things because I feel better. I feel more energized when I do those things. And so, one thing that we've adopted that I'm super grateful for is self treatment. So, we'll use like a little ball to kind of lay on, and one that gets us out of our heads, and just doing it for at least 5 minutes a day. Love yourself to do it at least 5 minutes a day. That
Mm.
adds up, as opposed to saying, oh, but I got to get this done. So, I'm going to neglect my health or my body. And I know that there's a phrase or a saying that I've learned, and it's, if you have good health, you have a million wishes. You want to do this or that or go here and have these experiences. But if you lose your health, you only have one wish, and that's to be healthy again. And so if we can adopt that mindset before our health challenges get us to that place, we will appreciate life much more. Yeah, do you have anything to share along those lines?
I love that, man. It's like it's almost like when we prioritize the things that make us feel good and make us feel whatever we're seeking. It's everything else kind of falls into place around that. Whether that be like money, making money, or like I don't know, but yeah, man, it's just self-love and doing the things that make you feel like you're loving yourself. That's the good stuff. That's gonna put you on the right path and make your everyday life overall better, I would say.
Nah, absolutely. I think you nailed it. I think you nailed it. Okay, so then you're kind of going out west, and
Mhm.
you kind of said you were looking for something, kind of like a seeker. What did you find?
Oh man, I feel like it's a constant pursuit. I think I have found a lot of inner peace and just the way of life for me. It's like living the way I do makes me feel content in this like inner peace. And I try to be consistently good at doing the things that make me feel that. And sometimes I'm not good at that, and having a lot of self-love helps with the pressure of feeling like I need to be consistent at those things because it's just like, yeah, my main goal is to be consistent at the things that make me feel good and acknowledge that sometimes I'm not gonna be good at that. And just if I come back to it, I won't go wrong. But yeah, it's constant mission, right? Don't know if we will ever know when we have like arrived at that destination. It's kind of fun seeking it too. It almost gives us purpose. Gives me purpose.
That's awesome. I think that's sage wisdom. I think we ignore how we feel to do things to impress people that we don't even like, you know? And
Totally.
that's just kind of ingrained into our society. And if there's a piece of advice I could give my younger self, it's less about how you look and more about how you feel.
Love that.
And so when you speak about chasing this feeling of contentment and peace, I think that that is beautiful. And I think if more people lived like that, you would be much more fulfilled in life. I think a question that often gets asked is, are you happy? And I think that I heard some monk say, I think that's the wrong question to ask. I think the better question is, are you content and are you at peace? Because those are deeper, meaningful levels of happiness that are not the superficial stuff. I think happiness comes from circumstance. Like I was happy because I got this or I had this experience. But that will be fleeting, and to expect happiness all the time is going to set you up for the unhappiness because that's just
Mm,
not going to happen. Life is about ebbs and flows. But if you can feel that contentment and that peace, it's like, dude, I'm exactly where I need to be. And I think that that feeling is rare for me to meet. But of course, I've met you, and I think that's maybe something that's drawn me towards you because I'm like, he gets it. He understands what's important in life. And then if you add that layer of purpose on that, that is another huge thing that I think people kind of lose sight of. They might sacrifice purpose for, a paycheck or for something more material. But if you have that, that gives you an intense focus and drive that most people don't have. And if you're on that path, I think that we have a freedom to pursue something we find purpose in. Versus, I think, like my parents' generation who had to immigrate to America, they didn't have that liberty. And is that something that I can see and be grateful for and take advantage of as opposed to just kind of living in the rat race and doing that thing that just stresses people out? You get overwhelmed and you kind of forget where you lost sight of what you were working towards.
totally, man. And yeah, I feel extremely grateful and lucky to have a upbringing where I had the means to kind of break out of the norm and live the way I do. I definitely did not do it on my own. I had had support from my family, but yeah, I do acknowledge not everyone has the means to kind of live this way of life, but I still think everyone has the opportunity to seek something similar, and I guess a better word for similar, just like seek fulfillment and true purpose, no matter where what your means are. I think everyone has the opportunity to search for that. You just kind of have to make a conscious effort, and I don't think you'll go wrong.
I completely agree. I think, I've gleaned a lot from just hearing your story in this kind of framework. And the thing that keeps coming up is freedom, and I think that freedom is being able to choose the life that you want to live. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not going to be any challenges or obstacles, but you are choosing that as opposed to being kind of forced into an environment where those things are chosen for you, and your heart knows that. And so whether it's someone like you or it's like I'm just choosing to go out west and just be a free spirit, then I'm gonna do that and find that for myself. Or someone like myself where I chose to start my own business or my own physical therapy and myofascial release practice, that then we're out of the rat race, so to speak. Now, again,
Totally.
that doesn't mean that this was easy, but the hardships that come along let me know that it's alive, and it's
Mm.
through those moments that even though they feel terrible in when they're happening, it's like when I look back, it's like that's part of what shaped me.
Absolutely, man. It's like, well, it's like having those hardships are totally a part of the process, and you learn lessons in those that can carry you forward. And if you run into a similar situation, you kind of have that life experience. To kind of relate this to climbing, it's like when we approach a sport climb or a trad climb or a boulder problem or a big, multi-pitch, you are choosing the amount of risk you are willing to take. And, you can approach life like that. Like, what are you willing to risk? It's like, what's your risk tolerance? Another thing I like to approach things with is like, what is the risk versus the reward? I think that's a good way to approach things. Yeah.
I love that.
Gotta take risks, man. Got to.
So I think that, when I hear you, risk is just something you naturally engage with. And for myself, I think there's an element of risk that I'm willing to take, because I'll say that for myself. When I was working for an insurance-based clinic, a new grad out of PT school, I would be bogged down and burnt out with documentation and insurance pressures and all these things. And it was like, I can't do this for the next 30 to 40 years. So what is the risk of me trying to start my own thing and taking that leap? And I just took all of the risk out of it, because I was like, if I flop and I fail at business, then I can always find another miserable job. There's a unlimited supply of miserable jobs. Yep. But if it works, then I have everything to gain. I have this potential for freedom. And I think that that's something that was part of my path. And I think it's part of everybody's path. When I hear you speak, you have your own version of that. I just want to thank you, Zeke. One, just being able to connect. I think I can just feel your energy. You're just this free-spirited, positive guy, and I think that's infectious. And so I just want to thank you for that. But are there any last things you'd like to share with my audience?
Oh man, I just want to reciprocate the thanks and the gratefulness for our friendship, man. I get so stoked when you're coming through town, and I love our time spent together. We'd always just go out rock climbing and just have great conversations. Yeah, man. As for your viewers, yeah, I hope you guys gained something beneficial from me and Unu's conversation. Yeah, hope all is well in their lives, and they're doing exactly what they want to do.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Myofascial Health. I help myofascial release therapists create beautiful websites for their MFR practices, even if they aren't tech savvy. If you're just starting your MFR practice, or you're an experienced MFR practice owner, learn more about how I can help at www.myofascial.health/website.